I returned to a house that remembered everything except me. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the lift. The porch light glowed like a lone sentinel in the Ohio dusk, casting long shadows across the steps. I once flew down, barefoot, a popsicle melting in one hand and a scraped knee on the other. Same brick facade, same gabled roof, same crooked mailbox Dad refused to fix because it had character. But the air it didn't know my name anymore. I stood still for a moment, just watching. The gnarled red maple out front had dropped most of its leaves the last few trembling, like they were too stubborn to fall. Dad loved that tree, said it was the soul of the house. The wind whispered through its bare limbs, and I felt nothing. No welcome, no pull. Just a vacuum of silence, like someone had vacuum-sealed the place of all memory. I held the key in my hand longer than necessary, thumb brushing over the grooves, like muscle memory might reactivate something. It slid into the lock effortlessly. That was the cruelest part, it still fit. But when I pushed the door open, the warmth I expected didn't follow. No scent of vanilla maple candles. No Labrador galloping to the door. No mother yelling, "Boots off, Eileen!" I just mopped. Just the hum of a diffuser and music too soft to be sincere. Someone else's curated version of comfort. Shoes lined the hallway neatly, none of them mine. The walls, once cluttered with photos and dog leashes, now held muted art prints in minimalist frames. A lavender yoga mat rested against the coat rack next to a monogrammed puffer jacket I didn't recognize. My boots felt heavier. I didn't belong here anymore. Neither did my memories. From deeper in the house came the sound of clinking glasses and the soft lilt of laughter, the performative kind people use at baby showers and business mixers. I followed the sound like a ghost attending her own wake. The kitchen had changed, same counters, but the fridge was stainless steel now, not the old white one covered in magnets and faded report cards. And there she was, Madison. She stood by the island, arranging tiny hors d'oeuvres on a stone platter, like she was auditioning for a magazine spread. Her sweater was cream, her makeup flawless. Her energy screamed hostess meets CEO. She looked up, and for a second I swear she almost smiled, but it passed like a sneeze suppressed. "Eileen," she said flatly, like she was identifying a cold sore. "You texted," I replied, adjusting the strap of my duffel bag. "Said I should come for Dad's memorial." She wiped her hands slowly on a white linen towel. "Things have been busy. Mom's not been herself. I've handled most of the planning." Before I could reply, I heard the click-click of heels behind me. Madison swept into the hallway like a lifestyle influencer launching a live stream. "Oh my God," she sang, arms outstretched. "Look who's back, the prodigal patriot." Her hug was brief, tight, and smelled like lavender essential oil and control issues. "It's not prodigal," I said. "It's honorable discharge." She blinked it theatrically. "Right. Technicality." She turned to the living room, her voice raised. "Everyone, this is my sister, Eileen Grace Weaver. You remember the mysterious one?" A few heads turned, offered cautious nods. Most didn't meet my eye. I recognized old neighbors, maybe a cousin or two. They looked at me like I was the dusty painting someone forgot to take off the wall. Nostalgic but irrelevant. I wandered toward the hallway like I needed to find a bathroom, but really, I just needed distance, something to anchor me. I opened the door to what used to be my room. The walls were now sage green, the bed replaced with a Peloton bike, and a white shelving unit filled with branded candles and yoga blocks. The diffuser pulsed eucalyptus. It wasn't a bedroom anymore, it was a wellness altar. A short, bitter laugh escaped me. All those nights I lay in that room staring at the ceiling, praying I'd make it back from Fallujah. All the mornings I woke up at 4 a.m. to study for the ASVAB. The tear-stained college rejection letter I taped to the dresser, gone. Scrubbed clean like I'd been a placeholder. A temporary tenant. She needed the space, came a voice behind me. "Marilyn, our mother." She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes hollow, like a candle burned too long. "We assumed you wouldn't be staying." I turned slightly. I didn't assume anything. I just came home. She held out a folded blanket and a pillow like a hotel concierge. "You can use the guest room. The one by the garage." I nodded without taking them. No hug. No question about the war, or therapy, or why I couldn't sleep through thunderstorms anymore. Just linen. Dinner was muted. Madison floated from guest to guest with that curated charisma she honed during her TEDx talk about mindfulness and meal prep. Marilyn stayed in the background, her hands trembling slightly as she poured decaf into mismatched mugs. I sat at the edge of the table, listening to conversations I wasn't invited into. Occasionally, someone would glance at me like they'd forgotten I was there. When dessert came, Madison stood, glass of organic wine lifted high. To those who stayed, she said, her voice velveted with performance. To the ones who kept this house alive. Applause. Polite. Hollow. I didn't raise my glass. My stomach twisted. There was a time I'd have thrown words like knives sharp and fast. Now I waited, watched. Like a soldier reading a battlefield, Madison leaned toward me and whispered, "You're lucky we didn't sell this place. Imagine where you'd be." It landed like shrapnel. Not pain, but rage, born of familiarity. They weren't ignoring me. They were erasing me, speaking of me in past tense, as if I had died somewhere overseas, and this version of me was just a replica they tolerated for appearance's sake. I stood walking away from the table from their theater. I found the cabinet near the window, the one Dad never let anyone open. The lock was still intact, the key long gone. But I had better tools now, my own damn memory. I retrieved a paperclip from the junk drawer and began to bend it. On the third try, the cabinet creaked open like a held breath. And there it was. The deed, my name. Still there, still mine. Outside, laughter erupted again. Inside, I closed the cabinet and whispered to no one. You think this house forgot me? But paper remembers. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like eucalyptus and artificial vanilla. Not the kind of warm scent that hugs you at the doorway, but a one that clings sterile and intentional, like it's trying to convince the house it's happy. The coffee pot sat untouched. No one in this version of the family woke early to greet the day anymore. That had been Dad's ritual, brewed black, no sugar, always poured before sunrise. Now the kitchen felt more like a film set. Everything was in its place, but no one was really living here. I stood by the island, watching steam curl from the kettle like a half-formed ghost. Connor sat across from me, elbows on the counter, flipping through a manila folder I'd pulled from the locked cabinet the night before. He looked older than I remembered, same military buzz cut, but more lines around the eyes and the calm intensity of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. "Everything's still in your name," he said, tapping the page. "Power of attorney expires after deployment. The deed was never revoked. She couldn't sell it if she tried." He flipped to another sheet. "She did try, by the way. Last year, filed a title transfer, clerk flagged it." My fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "And the will?" He nodded. "Scanned, notarized, witnessed, filed under your father's private account. You were listed as primary beneficiary, full ownership and legal authority over the estate." His voice softened, but not from pity, more like confirmation. He knew this might happen. I took a breath. It didn't steady me. "Madison told everyone I signed it over, said I gave up the house, said I wasn't coming back." Connor slid a folded page across to me. It was an email chain between Madison and our old neighbor, Mrs. Simmons, dated 3 years ago. "Eileen's gone. She's moved on. The house is mine now." The lie sat there in black and white, bold and confident. It didn't even shake. My hand did. From the hallway, voices filtered through guests arriving early to help prep for the memorial. Madison's voice stood out like a bell at a funeral. Light, sweet, calculated. Connor looked toward the noise. "She's built her image around this house. Selling it, living in it, live streaming it, hell, it's half her brand." He looked at me again. "What's the plan?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the top drawer of the kitchen hutch, the one Dad used to lock up his cigars and insurance forms. Inside, perfectly preserved, was the original sealed envelope with his signature and wax seal. The second will. I turned it over gently in my hands. "She wanted a show," I said quietly. "Let's give her one." That evening, the living room transformed. Candles flickered from every surface, some real, some fake. Framed photos of Dad lined the mantel. Madison had picked the flattering ones, cropped at the edges where I used to be. The music playing on the Sonos speaker was soft instrumental, a curated Spotify playlist titled "Strength Through Legacy." Guests arrived in polished shoes and quiet admiration. Someone handed me a glass of wine I didn't ask for. I held it like a prop. Connor set up a small tripod in the far corner. Discreet. Professional. The phone clipped into place, camera pointed toward the fireplace, already connected to Madison's Facebook Live. She hovered near the mantel, like she was preparing to accept an award. Her dress was navy. Tasteful, serious. She caught my eye once. No smile, no tension either. Just quiet confidence, like someone who had already rewritten the story in her favor. When the room settled, Madison stepped forward. Her voice slid out smooth as silk. "Thank you all for being here," she began, eyes glistening. Dad would have loved this. The community, the garden, the strength we've built from his loss. Murmurs of agreement. Someone sniffled in the back. He always said this house was about legacy. And today, we honor that legacy by passing it on to me. The words floated for a second. Then they dropped like a stone. People turned eyebrows raised. A few looked at Marilyn, who sat in the corner, stiff as starched linen. I stepped forward slowly, each step deliberate. Connor moved beside me, folder in hand. He didn't need to say anything. The camera was already rolling. I took the folder and opened it calmly. No rush, no fireworks, just truth laid bare. This house, I said, was never transferred. Not legally, not verbally, not morally. I held up the deed stamped and notarized. Eileen Grace Weaver, sole owner since 2012. The silence that followed had weight. Real weight, not awkwardness awareness. The kind that creeps up behind you and presses its hand on your shoulder. Madison's smile faltered, then dropped completely. "You're mistaken," she said, voice tight. "There was paperwork." Mom said. Connor stepped forward. "Your mother never filed a transfer. The clerk's record confirms rejection due to lack of authority. The claim of military disappearance also rejected." Gasps. The word disappearance did something to the air, like someone had kicked it. I looked at Marilyn. For the first time, she met my eyes fully. But she said nothing, and that said everything. Aunt Ruth's voice broke the silence. "But you said she gave it up." Her tone wasn't accusatory, it was confused. Like the math had stopped working. Like the truth didn't fit anymore. Connor pulled the last document from the folder and laid it on the coffee table, a printed email from Madison to Mrs. Simmons. And below it, a signed affidavit from the county office rejecting the transfer. "This," he said clearly, "is the paper trail." Madison stared at the page like it had personally betrayed her. Her jaw tightened, her hands clenched. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she spoke, but only loud enough for me to hear. "You're going to regret this." I smiled softly. "Not today." Someone from the back of the room said, "Wait, so this whole thing, this party, this memorial was based on a lie." Madison turned toward them, ready to recover. But the spell had broken. The camera was still streaming, and every viewer on Facebook now had front row seats to the unraveling. The room shifted, not physically, but emotionally. The loyalty she'd depended on cracked. I saw it in the averted eyes, in the pursed lips, in the sudden silence from Marilyn. I turned to leave, not because I was retreating, but because I had already won the first battle. Quietly, completely. But then from the hallway came the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. And a voice I hadn't heard in years, low, calm, and sharp with timing. "Hope I'm not late." Connor looked toward the entryway and muttered under his breath, "Well, that's unexpected." I turned, and there, standing in the foyer with a bottle of bargain wine and a knowing grin, was someone I never thought I'd see again. Connor's eyes locked on the doorway before mine did. His shoulders stiffened slightly, not in surprise, but in calculation, like someone who'd just been dealt a wild card in a high-stakes game. I turned, and there he was. Ethan. My cousin, but more like a ghost from another lifetime. Same sharp jawline, same quiet presence, now matured by years apart, and a confidence that wasn't there before. He wore a fitted black jacket, dark jeans, and a look in his eye that said he didn't come just to pay respects. He carried a duffel bag in one hand and a six-pack of Columbus Brewing IPA in the other, like he knew this wasn't going to be a quick stop. Ethan Marilyn's voice cracked like an old vinyl record. "I thought you were in Portland." "I was," he said, stepping in like he owned the air around him. "Flight landed this morning. I heard what was going on." His eyes moved across the room, scanning the audience, lingering on Madison, who stood frozen by the fireplace, still gripping her wine glass, as if it might anchor her in place. "You're not even on the invite list," she muttered, her voice too loud to sound casual. Ethan grinned. "Guess it got lost in the mail. Or maybe I just decided to show up when it mattered." He set the beer down on the hallway table, stepped forward, and gave me the kind of hug that speaks in code. We weren't close, not really, but in families like ours, the outcasts recognize each other fast. I'd forgotten how grounding it felt to be seen without performance. Madison pivoted back toward the crowd, pulling her lips into something shaped like a smile. "Well?" she said, raising her glass again. "How wonderful. The whole gang's back together." She didn't say it like she meant it. She said it like a threat laced in lace. The rest of the evening blurred around the edges. Guests trickled out awkwardly, some offering half-hearted condolences, others just murmuring goodbyes with eyes cast down. No one brought up the deed. No one brought up the live stream. But their silence carried weight, the kind of silence that knows it's been complicit. I caught Marilyn watching me once or twice from the dining room doorway, her mouth set in that tight line she wore when Dad used to get bad news from the VA hospital. She didn't say a word. Not that night. Not yet. After the last car pulled out of the driveway, I found Ethan leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping one of his beers. "Well," he said, tipping the bottle toward me, "that went smoother than I expected. For a public execution." I smirked. I didn't plan to go full scorched earth. He shrugged. Sometimes Earth deserves it. Connor joined us a few minutes later, setting the signed documents into a sealed envelope. "It's all filed now," he said. "Title affidavit, everything notarized. She can't contest it without making herself look worse." And yet I said I still don't feel done. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You want revenge?" "No," I said quietly. "I want air." That night, the house settled into its creaks and groans, like an old ship remembering how to float without a captain. Madison locked herself in the guest room. Marilyn disappeared with a crossword book and the kind of stillness that screamed louder than grief. I wandered back to my old room, or what used to be my room, expecting to find it unchanged. But the yoga mats were gone. So were the candles. In their place sat an empty suitcase, wide open like a wound. I didn't touch it. I just stood there staring at it, heart ticking like a clock too fast for its frame. On instinct, I opened my laptop and typed, "Franklin County Property Title Verification." The page blinked to life. A few keystrokes later, my name lit up on the screen, bold and unchallenged. Owner Eileen Grace Weaver. Last change never. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Not joy, not triumph, just oxygen. Then I clicked Request Certified Copy and sent it to my backup email and to Connor's encrypted cloud. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The next morning, the house smelled like burnt toast and misplaced guilt. Marilyn sat at the table with a chipped mug she'd kept since we were kids. It read, "World's Okayest Mom." She poured herself half a cup of coffee and didn't look up. "I didn't know you still drank it black," she murmured. "I never stopped," I said, pouring my own. She leaned back in the chair and stared out the window. "You've always been good at hiding things." I sipped slowly, not hiding, just surviving. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, with something worse. Shame. She didn't apologize, not directly. But she said enough. "I didn't know how to defend you without losing her." Madison. She never stops pushing, and "You folded," I said gently. She nodded. I folded. A beat of silence passed long and sharp. Then she whispered, "You were never the problem." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution. But it was something. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was yelling underwater. Later that afternoon, Connor set up a small recording space in the basement. The light was dim, the air cool and heavy with memory. I sat in Dad's old armchair while Connor checked the mic. "When you're ready," he said. I nodded, took a breath, and hit record. "This is Eileen Grace Weaver. This statement confirms full ownership of 42 Maple Ridge Lane, Columbus, Ohio, filed in my name and never legally transferred. Any claims of abandonment, mental incapacity, or military disappearance are false and unsupported by documentation." My voice stayed even, but the words tasted electric. Each syllable landed like a brick in the foundation I was rebuilding. When I finished, Connor checked the waveform. "Airtight," he said. Back upstairs, the sun dipped low, casting gold streaks across the living room floor. I found Ethan sitting by the window, scrolling something on his phone. "You good?" he asked. "I'm getting there," I replied. Then he looked up. "So, what are you gonna do next, now that it's yours again?" I stared at the floor for a moment, then at the house. The furniture, the silence. "I'm going to make sure she can't twist it again." He tilted his head. "Legally," I nodded, emotionally. That night, as I shut down my laptop, a notification popped up. One new voicemail. No caller ID. I pressed play. Madison's voice, brittle and cold, crackled through the speaker. "If you think this is over, think again. You might have won the crowd, but I know the system, and I'm not done." I stared at the phone for a long moment. Then I whispered, "Neither am I." The letter arrived 2 days later, thick, cream-colored stock with an embossed law firm logo, and the kind of envelope that made your pulse skip, even before it was opened. Connor brought it over himself. No text, no warning. Just walked through the door with that familiar tight line across his mouth. "She filed," he said, setting it on the dining room table like it might bite. I stared at the seal heart, already thudding, fingers flexing without touching it. "What's the claim?" I asked, voice flat. "Emotional distress, unlawful eviction, elder care, displacement," he replied. "She's arguing she was your mother's sole caregiver, had no other residence, and that you removed her without warning or compassion." He paused. "She's painting herself as the anchor of the household, the one who stayed behind, the one who sacrificed." I didn't laugh, not even a scoff, because this was the part I expected. When you take back what's yours, people don't surrender, they reposition. Madison wasn't going to lose quietly. She wanted to rewrite the ending, even if it meant dragging us both through the mud. Ethan walked in from the porch, saw the letter, and groaned audibly. Of course she's lawyering up. Image management's her second language. He plopped onto the couch, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered, "She's probably already crafting a podcast episode about resilience and betrayal." Connor opened the envelope carefully, sliding out the papers like they were made of glass. He skimmed them line by line, brow furrowed. "They're not trying to win," he said. "They're trying to smear. Drag this out. Make you look like the cold soldier who kicked her grieving sister to the curb." The story they were telling wasn't new. Woman comes back from war, cold, unstable, can't adjust, becomes the villain in her own house. It didn't matter if it was false. It sounded clean. I walked to the window and stared out at the yard. The red maple had lost more leaves, branches stark against a dull sky. It looked bare, but not weak, just honest. "Do we fight it?" I asked. Connor shook his head. "We could counter defamation, false claim of ownership, malicious possession. But it'll drag the whole thing out. Courts, depositions, press, maybe. And it'll cost you not just money, time, peace." I nodded slowly, then turned back toward the kitchen and opened the drawer beneath the old bread box. Inside were the files I'd prepped last month. Ownership records, digital backups, county clerk rejections, and the transcript from the live stream. Receipts. I laid them out like a hand of cards. What if I said slowly, "We don't counter"? Not fully. What if we offer her an out? Connor looked up surprised. "You want to settle?" "No," I replied. "I want clarity." She signs an affidavit. Says she was never owner, admits the false claims, agrees to stay off the property for good. And we file nothing else. We let her walk. Ethan sat up straighter. "You're serious. She wants a stage. I'm not giving her one. Let her sign or let her burn her own brand trying to claw at something she never earned." Connor exhaled, then gave a small nod. "I'll draft the affidavit." The next day, we sat across from Madison's lawyer in a sterile conference room with flickering fluorescent lights and water bottles no one touched. Her attorney was polished mid-40s, face-sharp voice, sharper, not a wrinkle out of place. She spoke like every word had been cleared by a PR team. "Ms. Walker has agreed to meet under the assumption this can be resolved without litigation," she began. Connor nodded. "Provided she agrees to the affidavit as written. No edits." Madison arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses still on outfit. Impeccable lips tight with performative restraint. She slid into the chair like the room owed her attention, so she said with a tight smile, "We're just rewriting history now." "No," I replied calmly. "We're correcting it." Her lawyer pushed the document across the table. Madison glanced at it, then back at me. You think this makes you noble, letting me off easy? No, I said. It makes me finished. She read the affidavit, lips tightening at key phrases, fabricated claims, willful misrepresentation, no legal ownership at any time. Her eyes flicked up. And if I don't sign, Connor spoke, then voice measured. Then we file, all of it. We open discovery. You explain your false claim of military disappearance, your forged documents. The live stream is public record now, so is the county denial. This affidavit is mercy. Madison stared at me for a long moment. Behind her eyes, 100 calculations flickered. Damage control, optics, narrative management. She reached for the pen, then paused. You'll be alone in that house, she said, voice low. Dad's gone. Mom's a shell. You're fighting for silence. I met her gaze without blinking. I'm not afraid of quiet anymore, she signed. When it was over, I stepped outside into the fall air, crisp and dry, the kind that cut right through to your bones but woke something up inside you. Ethan followed shoulders loose for the first time in days. She's not done, he said. I know, I replied, but now I'm not either. That night, I walked through the house barefoot. No music, no voices, just the sound of wood creaking a radiator, hissing gently, and the hum of the old fridge. I opened the safe in the study. Inside, behind the title, and Dad's watch, was a letter I'd never read. His handwriting was unmistakable, slanted all caps strong, even in ink. If you're reading this, Eileen, it means you came back. I knew you would. You've always been the strong one, even when we didn't see it. This house is yours, because legacy isn't about blood. It's about who holds the line when no one else will. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it, placed it back, and closed the safe. The next morning, a courier envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a typed message. Thought you should see this before she does. I plugged it into my laptop, hit play, and froze. There on the screen was a clip. Madison, talking to someone off camera. She'll cave, she said, brushing her hair back. She always caves. Worst case, I spin it into trauma. People eat that up. And just like that, the war reignited. The footage played like a slow unraveling. Madison sitting in what looked like her home office glass desk vision board. In the background, ring light softly washing her face spoke in a tone I'd only ever heard behind closed doors. Controlled, calculating. She'll cave, she said, voice smooth as melted sugar. Worst case, PTSD spin. I've seen how fast veterans get public sympathy, but if I control the narrative, I control the fallout. There was a pause, then laughter off-screen, male deep. Her boyfriend, maybe. Or her brand manager. I didn't care. I rewound the clip. Watched again. Not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me still hoped I'd misheard. That maybe my sister wasn't capable of packaging my trauma like a press kit. But no. There it was. Her face, her voice, her plan. Ethan stood behind me, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. You release this, he said slowly. You bury her. It's not about burying her, I murmured. Shutting the laptop. It's about digging myself out. By noon, Connor had the clip downloaded, timestamped, backed up in 3 locations, and logged into an encrypted folder. If she violates the affidavit or starts another campaign online, he said, we go nuclear. I nodded, but I wasn't waiting for her to make the next move. This wasn't chess anymore. It was reclamation. That afternoon, I called in a favor from someone I hadn't spoken to since my second deployment. Staff Sergeant Leah Torres, now turned journalist. She ran a small but loyal digital outlet that focused on veterans' rights and military housing disputes. When I told her I had a story and receipts, she booked a flight without hesitation. You ready to go public? She asked over the phone. Because this won't just expose her. It's going to expose everything she built. I'm not afraid of light anymore, I said quietly. Leah arrived 2 days later, camera gear in one hand, legal pads in the other. We filmed the interview in Dad's study. Just me, no makeup, no soft lighting, just honesty. I told the full story. Not just about the deed, but about the gaslighting, the silence, the erasure, about what it means to come home and be treated like a rumor. I showed her the cabinet where I found the deed, the safe, the will. I even showed her the yoga mat in the garage and the Reclaim Your Energy poster that still hung where my high school debate trophies used to be. What do you want people to understand? Leah asked Mike, still hot camera rolling. That legacy doesn't live in Instagram quotes, I said. It lives in who protects what matters when no one's looking. The article dropped a week later. Title: The Forgotten Soldier. How a decorated veteran fought to reclaim her family's truth. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't angry, it was precise. And it hit a nerve. Within 48 hours, the comments section exploded. Veterans tagged one another, military spouses reached out, old neighbors emailed to apologize. And one clip, just 30 seconds of Madison's voice saying, "Spin it into trauma," went viral. People didn't just see the lie, they felt it. Madison's brand began to implode. Sponsors paused partnerships. Her podcast ratings tanked. Her TEDx appearance was quietly delisted. She went silent online for the first time in 5 years. No curated breakfasts, no wellness quotes, just digital static. But the story didn't stop there. Because the more people read, the more they reached out. A woman in Montana emailed to say her brother had lost his house in a similar probate scam. A retired Navy medic from Florida sent a letter handwritten thanking me for speaking up. Said he'd felt invisible since '03. Said he cried reading my words. And then something I didn't expect, Marilyn knocked on my door. It was late. She wore a robe and slippers and held a box wrapped in an old dish towel. "These were your father's," she said, placing it on the table. I opened it slowly. Inside were dog tags, folded flags, and a journal I'd never seen. The first page was addressed to me. Eileen. If you ever feel erased, know that I never did. This house was always yours. But more than that, you were always mine. Even when I didn't know how to say it. She didn't cry, neither did I. But something shifted in that silence. Not healing, not yet. But gravity, the kind that reorients you. The next morning, I got an alert on my phone. Madison Walker goes live on Instagram. Against my better judgment, I tapped the link. She sat in a white chair in a sunlit room, face clean, voice composed. "I've been quiet," she began, "because I've been processing. Not everything you heard about me is true, but I won't deny that I made mistakes." She paused, eyes flickering down. "I lost my father, I lost my sister, and I lost control." Another pause, this one longer, calculated. "I won't be returning to content creation. I need space, and I hope, someday, Eileen can forgive me." Ethan scoffed beside me. "Classic damage control. She's already editing the story." I didn't answer. Because he wasn't wrong, but he wasn't completely right either. Madison had always known how to twist the lens. But for the first time, I didn't care. I stood, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The sky was cloudless. The maple tree bare, but not broken. Across the street, 2 neighborhood kids rode scooters in slow circles the same way I used to. Back inside, I pulled up the county clerk's portal again. Not because I doubted my ownership, but because I wanted to see it, my name. Eileen Grace Weaver. Still there, still whole. And just as I was about to log off, a new email arrived. Subject line: notice of intent to reopen claim. Plaintiff Madison Walker. She wasn't done. The courthouse smelled like lemon disinfectant and old paper, a scent that reminded me more of waiting rooms than justice. I sat at the plaintiff's table, blazer-pressed boots polished. Not military issue, but sturdy enough to stand through anything. Connor sat beside me, folders stacked like a fortress, his legal pad already half filled with notes and timestamps. Across the aisle, Madison sat with her lawyer. Her hair was curled tighter than usual. Her blouse softer, more civilian, like she was auditioning for a role titled The Misunderstood Sister. I didn't buy it, not anymore. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Gavel oath protocol. And then it began. Madison's attorney was first confident, practiced, rehearsed. She painted Madison as the faithful daughter, the emotional caretaker, the one left behind when I disappeared into uniform. She spoke of hardship, of loss, of the psychological burden of watching one's family fracture. She called my return abrupt. She called my claim territorial. She implied without outright saying that maybe I wasn't stable enough to be handling an estate this large. A few jurors shifted in their seats. That was the goal, sowed out with flowers. Then it was our turn. Connor stood, calm, clear. He moved like a surgeon. No dramatics, just facts. He opened with the original deed, the will, and the affidavit Madison signed under full legal counsel just weeks earlier. He played the leaked video, not the full thing, just the portion where she said PTSD spin. The courtroom was silent as the audio filled the space, Madison's voice echoing like a knife cutting through varnish. "Let me be clear," Connor said after the video ended. "This is not about grief. It's about control." I watched Madison then. Her expression never cracked. But her foot tapped just once, just enough to register. That was her tell. When it was my time to speak, I didn't use the script. I stood, walked to the witness stand, and told the truth as plainly as I could. About serving, about coming home, about walking into my childhood house and not recognizing my own reflection in the family's memory. I didn't ask to inherit the house, I said. I was given it because my father trusted me to honor what it stood for. I paused, letting my breath settle. And for the last 6 months, all I've done is defend that legacy from someone who decided the truth was negotiable. The courtroom didn't erupt. This wasn't TV. But the stillness that followed said enough. People were listening now, and Madison knew it. After lunch, something shifted. Her attorney stood again, but this time she asked for a sidebar. Whispered voices. The judge's brow furrowed. Then a recess was called. Connor turned to me slowly. "They're trying to settle again. She's offering to drop the case if you agree to issue a public statement saying you misunderstood her intentions." I blinked. "She wants an apology." "A reframing," he said. Her words, not mine. I stood up, walked out into the hallway, and called Leah. When she picked up, I asked, "Would it change anything if I just let it go?" There was a pause on the line, then her voice steady and low. "Letting go is a choice, but so is letting people rewrite your pain. Are you done being edited?" I ended the call and walked back inside. "No deal," I told the judge. Madison's attorney's mouth twitched. Whether it was irritation or relief, I couldn't tell. The judge announced closing statements would begin the next morning. As we filed out, Madison brushed past me near the security exit. "You're really going to drag this all the way through," she hissed, barely moving her lips. "You have no idea what you're burning down." I stopped, turned toward her. "You taught me how to strike the match. That night, I couldn't sleep." I sat in Dad's old chair, the house around me, breathing like a tired animal. I flipped open his journal again. Toward the back was an entry I hadn't noticed before, dated just after my first deployment. Saw the girls fighting again. I don't know what I did wrong, but I hope someday they see past the scorekeeping. Maybe grief makes us historians. Or maybe it just makes us liars. I closed the book and stared at the front door, where the porch light was still flickering, like it didn't know whether to stay on or give up. At 5:43 a.m., an email pinged to my inbox. Anonymous sender. Subject line Exhibit B, audio recording. I clicked. Madison's voice, again. But this time she was on the phone. I don't care if the will says her name. Dad was slipping. He'd forget stuff all the time near the end. "You think anyone's gonna trust a veteran over a grieving daughter if I cry on Good Morning America?" I didn't cry. I forwarded the file to Connor. The subject line, "Let's finish this." The courtroom was still as the judge entered for the final day, his robe crisp, his face unreadable. Outside protesters and local reporters had started to gather. Not for me, not even for Madison, but for the bigger idea our trial had begun to represent who owns a legacy when family turns it into a battlefield. Connor leaned toward me, whispering, "Play the audio last. Let everything else land first. Let the courtroom breathe, then crush her timing." I gave the faintest nod. I could feel the steel in my spine, the hum in my bones. Years of military poise trained me to withstand heat. This was different. This was personal. Madison looked different today. Less gloss, less deflection. Her lawyer didn't wear confidence as sharply either. They knew what was coming, or they'd guessed. Connor began calmly. He reviewed the facts again. Clean, sequential, no flourish. The will, the deed. The affidavit Madison had already signed and attempted to walk back. The live stream. The media fallout. The harassment I'd received. The statements she'd made that contradicted every public claim she tried to peddle. Then he paused and said, "For the record, Your Honor, we received an additional piece of evidence late last night." He played the audio. Her voice filled the courtroom again, only this time more venomous, colder. "Dad was slipping. You think anyone's gonna trust a veteran over a grieving daughter if I cry on Good Morning America? A collective shift happened. People sat up straighter. Even the bailiff blinked. Madison didn't speak. Her mouth pressed into a line, hands curled into fists under the table. The judge didn't react, not visibly. But when he called for a recess, he didn't look at her. Out in the hallway, I stood by the vending machine, not hungry, just needing something mechanical to focus on. The machine blinked error, and I laughed. It felt strange, almost human. Marilyn approached me slowly. She looked thinner than she had weeks ago, and older too, grief, guilt, and time finally catching up with her all at once. I didn't know she'd gone that far, she said softly. I thought it was just sibling bitterness, some rivalry, like when you both fought over the backseat window. This isn't childhood, I said. No, she agreed. This was war, and I picked the side with prettier lies. We stood there quietly. I didn't offer comfort. She didn't beg for forgiveness, but something passed between us. Not healing, maybe just truth. Back inside, the judge returned, settled in, and began his ruling. Ownership of 42 Maple Ridge Lane remains solely with Ms. Eileen Grace Weaver. The court finds that Ms. Madison Walker knowingly and willfully submitted misleading claims and evidence in an attempt to defraud the estate. While criminal charges are not being pursued at this time, all civil claims filed by Ms. Walker are hereby dismissed with prejudice. There was no applause, no fist-pumping, just silence thick and final. As we stood, Connor whispered, "You just changed your entire family's trajectory." I nodded once. I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to stop the erasure. We exited through a back hallway to avoid press. Out in the parking lot, Ethan was waiting, leaning against my truck like he had nowhere else to be. "You did it," he said. "She lost," I replied. He shook his head. "Nah. You didn't just win. You reclaimed something they thought you'd forgotten." That night back at the house, I walked from room to room. Slowly. I touched the frames, the corners of rugs, the little burn mark in the kitchen counter where Dad once set a hot pan without a mitt. Everything was still here, and everything was mine. I opened the safe again. Dad's journal, the letter, his old Navy cap, and underneath them, tucked flat against the bottom, I found something new. A photo, folded, faded. It was Madison and me. On the porch. I was maybe 12, she was 8. We were barefoot, laughing, holding popsicles and pointing at something off camera, probably Dad with the lens. On the back, written in Dad's blocky hand, "Someday you'll both come back, just not at the same time." I stared at it a long time, then tucked it back and shut the safe. The next morning, I made coffee black and hot. I stepped out onto the porch, same as I'd done with him 100 times. A new chill was in the airfall, giving way to winter. And then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Eileen Grace Weaver," a voice asked. Calm. Professional. Male. "Yes, this is Detective Mark Hensley with Franklin County. I need to ask you a few questions. It's regarding a separate case involving estate fraud and false affidavit claims connected to a previous beneficiary from your father's will." I froze. "Your sister isn't the only one," he said. "Story 2. They call me Nora Winters. I'm 41, and I know exactly what it feels like to be erased in real time. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays always seem to betray you, never loud like a Monday, never forgiving like a Friday, just silent enough to let your life collapse without witnesses. That morning, I was buried in Section 17B of an ethics audit, the kind of bureaucratic beast that even the Department of Justice wouldn't touch without a spiron. I had a half-cold coffee on my desk and 14 tabs open when he walked in. Micah Sloan. Mid-30s. MBA from somewhere with Ivy and legacy donations. His hair was overly obedient, like someone threatened it with lawsuits. And his expression, that smug, moisturized confidence of a man who thinks disruption means replacing the office fridge with kombucha taps. "Hi, team," he called out like he was addressing a TED Talk. His voice carried that bright TED-trained pitch meant to disguise the bloodbath to come. Behind him, our CFO trailed like a bodyguard with Stockholm Syndrome, nodding like a dashboard bobblehead. Micah's speech was textbook streamlining operations, unlocking innovation, reimagining compliance workflows. At some point, he threw in a quote from Steve Jobs. That's when I knew we were in danger. Before lunch, he had already renamed the Slack channels, canceled our weekly compliance check-ins, and posted a nauseating efficiency challenge on the bulletin board. like it was summer camp. At 1:37 p.m., he called me into his office. "Not can we talk or I value your input. Just step in here for a sec." His new glass-walled kingdom looked like a tech startup lost in a WeWork. A Monstera plant sat dramatically next to a whiteboard scribbled with arrows and buzzwords like agile DNA and zero redundancy. "Hey, you're Nora, right?" he asked already, scanning something on his tablet. "I noticed you're kinda everywhere on this org chart." I raised an eyebrow. "I manage interdepartmental compliance. That's how compliance works." Sure, he said like he was humoring a child who claimed their cat could talk. "But see, legacy structures can slow things down. And with your tenure, how long have you been here?" 12 years, I said flatly. He smiled like he'd just found a VCR in his Airbnb. "Wow, that's vintage." Then came the guillotine. "Moving forward, we're reallocating oversight. I'll be installing a leaner team structure." "So..." He paused, probably hoping I'd cry or beg. I didn't. He went on, "HR will finalize the transition." "I see," I replied calmly, because showing pain to men like Micah only feeds them. By 4 p.m., I had an Outlook invite titled Closure and Continuity Chat. Cute. I showed up, signed the papers. They handed me an exit packet thick with empty promises and thin on severance. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to, because I knew something Micah didn't. I was the only one in the building licensed to certify federal compliance under Sections 9B and 22D. The certifications that took years to earn and needed renewal every 18 months, paid for ironically by the company. The fine print in my employment contract, all certifications tied to my name became invalid the moment they terminated me. No backfill, no grace period, just gone. They didn't read the contract. Micah certainly hadn't. Wednesday morning came with a silence too sharp to ignore. By 9 a.m., 3 procurement shipments were frozen. By 11, finance sent an alert license, validations failed. Operations halted. By 3 p.m., our main government contract, valued at $38 million, was flagged as non-compliant and risked revocation. And I was in yoga pants, sipping an oat milk latte reading Micah's cringy LinkedIn post. Leadership is hard, but necessary. It got 4 likes, 2 from interns, 1 from someone named Mom. Then came the sirens. Not literal ones, of course, but close enough. Legal blasted an all-staff email, urgent compliance review, mandatory. Apparently, the CEO, Mr. Leonard Bray, 62, yacht-tanned and whisper-rumored to play poker with senators, had just flown in from Monaco and asked the million-dollar question, "Why the hell did you fire Nora?" Silence. The kind that kills careers. Micah stammered something about innovation. Leonard cut him off mid-sentence. "You terminated the only federally recognized compliance officer this company has." Micah blinked. Legal tried to jump in. We thought, "You didn't think Leonard snapped." And now we're dead in the water. That's when someone, an intern I later heard, mumbled, "We can't renew the license without her credentials." Leonard's voice dropped an octave. "How long?" "Legal, 6 weeks, if she reapplies." If Leonard echoed like he'd tasted something bitter. "Has anyone called her?" "We sent an email." Leonard turned to Micah. "You have 12 hours. Micah's email hit my inbox at 7:09 p.m. Subject line, "Let's build together. A path forward." Inside, corporate spin apologies wrapped in nonsense and an offer. Consultant role. Reduced base pay. Incentive-based bonuses. 6-month contract. NDA included, of course. I flagged it, didn't reply. By the time my cheesecake arrived, so did a call. Unknown number. I answered half laughing. "Hi, Micah." He was already talking. "Listen, Nora, I know we started off wrong. Totally on me. But the board's freaking out and..." I cut in. "Micah? I don't come back to fires I didn't start." Pause. "Nora, please. I need this." "I'm sure you do," I said, popping a raspberry in my mouth. "Good luck." I hung up. Outside, the sky turned violet over the skyline. Somewhere in a conference room downtown, Micah Sloan was trying to explain why no one could approve invoices, why the compliance flag had tripped an audit, and why LinkedIn was now buzzing with a post from Anonymous Insider about a catastrophic HR misstep. Me! I was finally breathing, and I hadn't even begun the real payback. The thing about corporate screw-ups is they rarely implode all at once. No, they unravel like a cheap sweater, one arrogant tug at a loose thread, and suddenly the whole facade starts to fall apart. By Thursday morning, the unraveling had begun in earnest. I didn't need to hack anything or leak confidential memos. I just sat back and let their own incompetence set fire to the building. But I wasn't content to watch. No, I wanted them to feel it. Because what they had done wasn't just professionally insulting, it was personal. You don't erase 12 years of work and integrity and expect the person you buried to stay buried. I spent that morning organizing files they didn't even know existed. Not the reports they could find on the server, I'm talking about the real stuff. The gray zone memos. The discrepancies I flagged for years that no one wanted to deal with. The quiet little cover-ups I documented, not because I was suspicious, but because I'm thorough. Meticulous. The kind of meticulous that made people underestimate me. That was their first mistake. While they were fumbling through old onboarding spreadsheets, trying to figure out who could recertify vendor agreements, I was meeting with a contact from the Federal Ethics Bureau, someone I'd mentored when they were still just an analyst fresh out of Georgetown. I handed them a sealed manila envelope across the table at a quiet cafe. Inside, a printed trail of time-stamped emails flagged inconsistencies and a compliance deviation log that went back 5 years. No edits, no drama, just facts, cold, clean, and lethal. "You're not filing an official complaint?" they asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I want it logged, in case they come after me." And I meant it, because people like Micah don't just trip and apologize, they scramble, they scheme, and they throw others under the bus to survive. I wasn't going to be anyone's scapegoat again, not in this lifetime. Later that afternoon, I checked LinkedIn out of pure curiosity. That anonymous post, it had exploded. Comments poured in, some vague, some razor sharp, one from a former vendor. So that's why our license renewal was frozen. Another from a junior associate. I thought it was shady how quickly they shut down the audit team. Every reaction chipped away at the company's carefully curated image. By Friday, rumors leaked that one of the quarterly contracts, worth just over $7 million, was being reevaluated by a federal oversight committee. And wouldn't you know it, my name was suddenly very popular in upper management circles again. I got calls from 4 different execs. None of them had spoken to me in over a year. One even started the conversation with Nora. "You've always been the glue of this place." I almost choked on my coffee. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from Evelyn Chen, former VP of Risk. We'd worked together for 3 years before she took early retirement and vanished to some beach town in Oregon. Her message was short, precise, and chilling. Subject: Micah's past. Text: "I've seen this before. He did the same thing at Langford Tech. Fired the compliance lead and tried to absorb her authority. It cost them 2 government contracts and a lawsuit. I still have the files. Want them?" "Yes, Evelyn. Yes, I did." Within 2 hours, I had a PDF folder of internal memos, legal summaries, and get this, a whistleblower statement from the woman he pushed out at Langford. Different city, different company, same exact blueprint. He sweet-talked his way in, cut out anyone who knew more than him, and then drowned in the consequences. This wasn't ambition. This was a pattern. I could have gone nuclear right then, sent the documents to a journalist friend, or straight to Leonard Bray, the CEO. But that would have been too easy. I wanted Micah to see it coming. Slowly, painfully. I wanted him to hear the whispers in the hallway, to feel the ground shifting under his Italian leather shoes before the earthquake hit. So I sent him a message. Subject line: Langford patterns. Body: "You're predictable. You should be careful where you recycle strategies. Not everyone stays quiet." He read it within 8 minutes. No reply. But 20 minutes later, Paul from HR called. "Nora," he said, sounding like he'd just aged 5 years in one afternoon, "Leonard would like to meet. In person, tomorrow morning. Can you make that happen?" "Tell Leonard I'm busy," I said calmly, "but I'm willing to speak to him under my terms." Silence. "And what are your terms?" "I'll send them in writing, tomorrow." Then I hung up. Because here's the truth: when you hold power, you don't rush. You don't apologize. You don't explain yourself to men who treated your loyalty like dead weight. I drafted my terms that night with the same care I used to build compliance frameworks, line by line, airtight, and unshakable. I asked for a 3-month consulting agreement at triple my former salary. I asked for full autonomy in all compliance-related decisions. I demanded an apology not public, but written and addressed to me personally. No form letter. No "we regret." Just a simple, clear acknowledgement of who messed up and why. And then I added the clause they didn't expect any re-entry offer had to include a full audit of Micah's decisions since taking over. I wanted his every shortcut, every misstep, every undocumented change dragged into the light. Not to humiliate him, just to protect the people he hadn't hurt yet. I hit send at midnight. By morning, my inbox had a response. Leonard agreed. All of it. No negotiation. Micah, it seemed, had finally become more trouble than he was worth. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because this wasn't about winning. This was about restoring what they tried to erase. And that meant walking back through the doors they slammed shut on me with my head high and their silence deafening. The building hadn't changed, but I had. When I stepped back into that polished lobby on Monday morning, it felt like a test. Same marble floors, same fake orchids near the elevators, same receptionist who barely looked up when I walked in. But I wasn't the same woman they escorted out 10 days earlier with a clipboard and an empty smile. Now I walked in by invitation. With a signed contract and terms they had no choice but to accept. Leonard Bray himself was waiting on the top floor, which told me everything I needed to know. Men like him didn't wait for anyone unless someone was on fire. The elevator doors opened into silence. No glass-breaking arguments, no panicked typing, just Leonard by the window's sunlight spilling over his tailored navy suit. He turned holding a cup of espresso like it was war paint. Nor, he said, nodding, "Thanks for coming." I didn't return the courtesy. "Where's Micah?" "Still employed, for now." I raised an eyebrow. Leonard motioned toward the long boardroom. "Walk with me." We moved through the quiet corridor like ghosts. No one made eye contact. A few doors clicked shut behind us. Fear travels fast in corporate culture. It doesn't matter if you're guilty. It only matters who might be next. Inside the boardroom, I placed my satchel on the table and pulled out a slim binder. No theatrics, just the facts, my signature style. Before we discussed next steps, I said, flipping open the cover, "I want you to see this." Leonard skimmed the first page, then the second jaw, tightening by degrees. A full audit log of compliance decisions made by Micah Sloan over the past 9 days, unauthorized approvals, skipped checkpoints. Internal overrides without corresponding justification. Some flagged, most not. I cross-referenced with your own access logs, I said. Half these approvals went through at night. No witnesses, no dual sign-offs. He closed the binder gently, but his silence cracked with tension. Why didn't anyone catch this? I gave him a long look. Because you fired the person who could. Leonard exhaled. No excuses, no denial. Just that quiet CEO-grade dread, the kind they bury under performance reports and champagne launches. "Have you spoken to legal?" I asked. "They're already drafting contingency plans." "You'll need more than plans." He nodded. "We want you to lead the internal audit, full authority, effective immediately. No oversight. None." That was the first smart thing he'd said all morning. I left the boardroom with my access badge, reinstated my own office reassigned, and a formal apology letter sealed in a thick envelope exactly as I'd requested. It wasn't about ego, it was about correction. For once, the record would show who was right and who made a mess trying to play boss. Back in my new office, which was ironically Micah's old one, I opened the blinds, let the city pour in, and powered up the laptop they left on the desk. Clean desktop, default background. No trace of him except the subtle scent of expensive cologne and a half-used packet of ginger chews in the drawer. I dropped them into the trash and began. The first thing I did was pull team rosters. Names, roles, risk exposure by department. I made notes in the margins who'd been looped into decisions without proper authority, who was likely coerced into skipping steps, who might have been bullied into silence. I wasn't looking for scapegoats. I was looking for patterns. The same way Micah had made me a target, I wanted to map the structural weaknesses he used, so I could close every door behind him. By midweek, I'd assembled a task force. Renee from Junior Compliance, a brilliant but often overlooked analyst who'd quietly documented discrepancies no one wanted to see. Marco from Procurement, who'd caught shipment delays last week, but was brushed off. And Yvette, a veteran from Risk Management, with 20 years of institutional memory and zero patience for posturing. We met in my office every morning. No hierarchy, just truth. They've been using old clearance codes to bypass review protocols, Renee said on Wednesday, pulling up a report with yellow highlights bleeding off the page. Some of these haven't been active since 2019. Marco leaned forward. Then why are they still working? Because someone reactivated them. Yvette frowned. That someone better start packing. I didn't smile. Not yet. There was more. Thursday, I received a message from an anonymous source. No greeting, just a Dropbox link. Inside a video clip, grainy audio from the hallway outside my former office. Micah's voice low and hurried. If we loop the validation through the shell vendor, we can skip Nora's clearance. She's too stuck in the old process. This is how we scale. The video ended. No context needed. I forwarded it to Leonard with no comment. 5 minutes later, he replied, "We'll handle it." By Friday, the consequences began to land. Micah was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His name vanished from Slack. HR posted a brief internal update calling it a strategic transition, which everyone knew was code for "he got caught." The best part, I didn't have to say a word. I didn't need revenge by fire, just light. That afternoon, Renee stopped by my office with a nervous smile. "Did we win?" she asked. I looked up from the data audit log, pausing just long enough to answer clearly. "We're not here to win," I said. "We're here to fix what they broke." That night, I stayed late. The building emptied out, lights dimmed, but I wasn't alone. The silence felt earned clean, not lonely. I took out the apology letter Leonard had written. The wording was careful, sincere enough. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was the final sentence. "We understand now that Nora Winters was not replaceable." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my drawer, and turned off the lights. They thought they could erase me. Instead, I became the line they couldn't cross again. The worst villains don't get dragged out by security or escorted through a sea of pointing fingers. No, they fade out quietly, like smoke slipping through vents, leaving behind nothing but the damage. That's how Micah left. No farewell email, no final meeting, just a placeholder message from HR and a vacuum where his ego used to sit. But I didn't need a public spectacle. His silence was the only confession I needed. Of course, removing Micah didn't fix the system. The rot he'd introduced had threaded itself into corners most people never looked. Broken sign-off chains, suspicious vendor relationships, compliance reports that were marked reviewed but never opened. I wasn't just cleaning up after him, I was cleaning up after everyone who let him thrive. And that was a much bigger job. The deeper I dug, the more I saw at patterns no one had questioned because they were convenient. Departments had learned to function without accountability. Internal politics had carved pathways that bypassed safeguards. And the truth, Micah had simply accelerated a decline that had already begun. He wasn't the problem, he was the symptom. That's when I realized I wasn't rebuilding what we had. I was tearing it down and starting over. Renee and I created a new risk matrix, one that didn't just evaluate process failure, it tracked moral shortcuts. We measured things like silent compliance, unchecked privilege, and untraceable influence. I called it ghost metrics, because what we were really looking for weren't systems, we were hunting ghosts, the people who operated in shadows, whispering approval into the void, leaving no fingerprints but plenty of consequences. One of those ghosts turned out to be our very own procurement head, Russell Avery. He'd been in the company for 14 years, soft-spoken, polite, the kind of man who never missed a birthday or a budget cycle. But he'd quietly authorized 3 shell accounts under Micah's accelerated compliance pipeline, and one of those accounts led straight to a third-party consulting firm, owned by Russell's cousin. I confronted him in my office on a Thursday afternoon. "Russell," I said, sliding the folder across the desk. "I think you know what this is." He barely blinked. We were under pressure. Micah said we needed quick turnarounds. I leaned back. "Did he also tell you to route $480,000 through a fake LLC? He swallowed hard. I didn't benefit. It wasn't personal. That's what everyone says, until someone audits their retirement account. He slumped slightly. Not guilty, just tired. You don't know what it was like, Nora. People were scared of saying no. I didn't respond, because I did know. I had been one of those people, just not someone who stayed that way. Russell was put on leave pending investigation. And the minute he stepped out, I felt the shift ripple across the departments. No one said anything directly, but eyes changed when the PA passed me in the hallway. Quieter, sharper. Like they were seeing me for the first time, not as the woman they ignored in glass meetings, but the one who could quietly undo them. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't flinch from it either. That night, as I sat alone reviewing financial filters, Yvette flagged I got a call. Not from HR, not from Leonard, from someone I hadn't heard from in years. "Hi, Nora," the voice said, tentative but familiar. I paused. Elise. Elise Langdon had been my mentor once, back when I first joined the company. Brilliant. Strategic. She taught me everything about audit trails and risk offsetting. Then one day she disappeared. The story was vague early retirement or personal matters. Now I was hearing her voice again. "I heard what happened," she said. "Saw your name in a compliance newsletter. You're making waves." I wasn't sure how to respond. "I have something you might want to see," she continued. "Back when I left, it wasn't my idea. There was a pattern. You weren't the first." I leaned forward. "Go on." I documented everything. The restructuring schemes, the quiet terminations, compliance being turned into decoration. I sent the files to legal, but they buried it. I still have the originals. "Elise, why didn't you come forward?" A pause. "Because I was tired and alone." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you're not alone, and you're not tired. You're just getting started." She sent the files that night. 148 pages of forgotten memos, financial anomalies, whistleblower complaints that never made it to the boardroom. And Micah's fingerprints were all over them even before he joined our firm. Apparently, he'd been consulting quietly on several of the modernization plans that gutted half the compliance department years before he officially came on board. Which meant his arrival wasn't an accident. It was a setup. Micah had been embedded, groomed for leadership, put in place by a board member who wanted lean operations to inflate investor reports, and I had walked right into it. This wasn't just about a bad manager. It was about systemic corruption, and I was holding the match. The next morning, I printed 3 copies of the documents. One went to Leonard, one went to legal. The third, I sealed that one in an envelope and mailed it to a journalist. I trusted a former compliance lawyer turned investigative reporter who ran exposés on institutional rot. No names, no quotes, just a trail of documents that told their own story. By Monday, Leonard called me in again. "You realize what you've started," he said. "No small talk this time." "I didn't start this," I replied. "I'm just not pretending it's invisible anymore." He was quiet for a long time, then nodded. "We're issuing a voluntary disclosure to the Bureau." "Good," I said. It's time the company stopped hiding behind polished decks and smiled liars. Leonard exhaled. "And Nora, I want you to lead the reform." I met his gaze. "Only if I get to pick the team. No interference, full autonomy, and a public report when it's done. You'll get it. Put it in writing." He did. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything. I didn't gloat. I just sat by my apartment window, coffee in hand, watching the city lights blink like signals from some distant future. I'd become the ghost in the system, the one they thought they erased. Now I was the system, and I wasn't leaving any doors open behind me. The truth doesn't shatter everything at once. It seeps in slow, deliberate turning cracks into fractures until the whole structure can no longer hold its weight. That was the mood the day the disclosure went public. Quiet dread. No alarms, just the sound of reputations being dismantled behind closed doors. Employees came in early and left early. Emails were vague, meeting invites got mysteriously canceled. The building smelled like coffee and panic. I knew the memo was coming. Leonard gave me a heads up the night before. "We're calling it a formal compliance recalibration initiative," a euphemism wrapped in legal cotton. He asked me to stand beside him when he addressed the company. I declined. I had no interest in being a prop for damage control. This wasn't about image, it was about reckoning. When the email finally landed at 9:17 a.m., I was already deep into organizing the next phase of the audit. My team, Renee, Marco, and Yvette, had grown. We now had 2 analysts from finance and an attorney from legal who had, in her words, seen enough nonsense to last a lifetime. Everyone in the room understood this wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a reckoning. And we were the ones writing the report. Later that morning, Leonard faced the company in the atrium. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I heard enough in the aftermath muted gasps from marketing and audible, finally, from someone in procurement. By noon, the whispers had names. Micah wasn't the only one under review. 4 more managers were flagged. 2 had quietly resigned over the weekend. 1 had lawyered up. And the 4th, he left a resignation letter with only 5 words, "I was never the villain." But of course, that's the thing about villains. Most don't think they are. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a letter addressed to me. Handwritten. No return name, just initials EL. It was from Elise. I told myself for years that leaving quietly was the safest choice, she wrote. But it never sat right. We were never meant to protect power. We were meant to protect truth. Folded inside was a USB drive. On it, voice memos Elise had recorded in her final week's conversations with HR calls with the board. Her own reflections as she watched the foundation of the company rot from the inside. She documented everything, not for revenge, for someone who would come after her, someone like me. It was eerie hearing her voice, calm, clinical, clear, but layered with something I hadn't expected: exhaustion. That special kind of fatigue that comes from being gaslit by a system built to discredit your instincts. She hadn't walked away. She had been pushed out and convinced it was her idea. That tactic, I realized, had a name now: corporate euthanasia. Kill the conscience, but make it look like a choice. I submitted the files as supplemental evidence. Legal responded within the hour. They wanted Elise to testify in the internal inquiry. I called her. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. There was a pause. "I'm tired of hiding," she said. "If you're still standing, I can stand too." 2 days later, we sat together in a narrow wood-paneled conference room on the 17th floor. Across from us sat a panel of outside legal consultants hired to investigate without bias. Elise told them everything: dates, conversations, patterns. I filled in the gaps, connecting what she saw years ago with what I had uncovered now. Piece by piece, we built the entire picture. Not just what Micah did, but how the company let it happen. The enablers, the passive spectators, the subtle culture of silence disguised as professionalism. At the end of the session, one of the consultants, a retired judge with eyes like glass, looked directly at me and said, "This should have been stopped years ago. You did more than fix it. You faced it." And still I didn't feel vindicated, because winning would mean it never happened at all. The next morning, I was called into Leonard's office again. He was quieter than usual, his tone more human. "We're preparing a public statement," he said, "and we'd like you to review it." I read it silently. It was decent. A little too sanitized, but earnest enough. I edited only one line. They had written, "We regret the oversight that led to recent failures." I changed it to, "We acknowledge the culture that allowed unethical behavior to fester unchecked." Leonard didn't push back. "We're also restructuring the board," he said after a beat. "One member is stepping down, voluntarily." I didn't need to ask who. Micah, settling out of court, NDA sealed. He's out. And just like that, the source of the fire vanished into smoke again. But this time the damage had a paper trail, and the fire left burn marks too deep to ignore. That night, I walked the long way home. Not because I needed the air, but because I needed the silence. I passed familiar storefronts, a ramen shop I used to visit during late audit weeks, a bookstore that once hosted a leadership talk where Micah quoted Sun Tzu like he understood war. It all felt distant now, like looking back at a former life and realizing you don't miss the person you were in it. I paused on a bridge overlooking the river. It was quiet, the water dark and soft under the streetlights. I thought about how many women like Elise had walked away, told themselves it was safer to disappear than to fight. How many voices were left unheard simply because no one was ready to listen. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who refused to forget. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The next day we published the full internal report. Unredacted, no press release, no spin, just the truth. Quiet, measured, relentless. Within 24 hours, it was picked up by 3 major outlets. Not for scandal, but for honesty. A former whistleblower from another firm commented online. Finally, someone said it without asterisks. The board launched a new ethics initiative. Leonard offered me the position of Chief Compliance and Integrity Officer. I declined. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted to choose when the story ended, not let the system decide for me. Instead, I proposed something different. Build an independent internal ethics council, rotating membership. No direct report to the board. Give power back to the people who notice when things don't feel right. Give them teeth. He said yes. And just like that, something new began, not from the top, but from the inside. Some victories don't sound like cheers. They sound like silence. A calm, steady kind, the kind that follows a storm after you've nailed every window shut, held your ground, and watch the sky tear itself apart without taking you down. That was the silence in my apartment the morning after the Ethics Council launched. No email pings, no urgent texts, just light filtering through the curtains, warm coffee in my hand, and a quiet, measured breath that felt like my own again. The press hadn't sensationalized the story. And that was perfect. No drama, no firestorms, just headlines that finally told the truth. Internal audit exposes flawed compliance structure, sparks industry reform. They called it a case study in ethical course correction. One podcast even dubbed it the Winter Doctrine. That part made me laugh. I didn't want a doctrine. I just wanted people to remember what happens when you dismiss the wrong woman. The weeks that followed were quieter but no less powerful. The Ethics Council met bi-weekly. Small room, diverse voices. Janitors, interns, engineers. Anyone could submit a case anonymously, and every single one got read aloud. The shift was immediate. People walked with straighter backs, spoke with less fear. Even silence in the halls changed shape. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was listening. Leonard kept his distance. He'd taken a quieter role behind the scenes, mostly focused on investor relations now. We passed each other sometimes in the elevator. No tension, just mutual recognition. We had survived something together, but we were never the same after. And that was okay. As for Micah, rumor had it he was consulting for a mid-tier firm in Phoenix under a different title. Probably spinning new buzzwords, selling efficiency to people who didn't know better. I didn't care. His shadow had been replaced by something better, systems that held structures that breathed, and people who finally had somewhere to go when something felt wrong. One afternoon, Renee knocked on my door. She had a stack of folders in her hands and a cautious smile. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, placing them on my desk. "I've learned more in the last 3 months than I did in 3 years of training." I smiled. "You've taught me just as much. Never let anyone tell you to wait your turn to lead." She nodded, then hesitated. "Are you staying?" It was a good question. I'd been thinking about it for weeks. I had rebuilt what was broken. The fire was out. The ghosts had names. The system finally had a conscience. And yet, something in me was stirring. Not unrest, just knowing. Knowing that my time here had a shape, and it was rounding out at the edges. "I'm leaving at the end of the quarter," I told her. "It's time." She didn't look surprised, just respectful. "You're going to be impossible to replace." "No," I said gently. "I'm going to be the reason someone else knows it's possible to begin." I typed the resignation that evening. Not a dramatic goodbye, no war stories, just 4 clean paragraphs, an offer to help transition leadership, and one final line. I came back to fix what was broken. I leave now because it can stand without me. I signed it, no hesitation. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking towards something else. A week later, the council held a farewell meeting for me. Just 10 people in a circle. No suits, no formalities. Yvette brought tea. Marco brought his toddler, who promptly tore into a pack of sticky notes and threw them like confetti. Someone had baked lemon muffins. "You didn't just rewrite policy," Renee said softly. "You changed the way we look at silence." I didn't speak right away. When I finally did, I told them the truth. When I was pushed out, I thought that was the end of the story, but it wasn't. It was just the part where I got to decide who I really was when no one was clapping. I came back not for revenge, but because I knew what would happen if I didn't. I came back because one person willing to tell the truth without blinking can scare systems built on fear. I looked around the room. You are those people now. Keep watching, keep speaking. And when it's someone else's turn to come back from the fire, make room for them. I left the building with no ceremony. No security badge to return, just a satchel over my shoulder and sunlight in my face. Outside, spring had cracked open the city. Sidewalk trees were blooming. A barista at the corner cafe was playing Sam Cooke on a speaker. I passed the bookstore again, the same one that once hosted Micah's ridiculous talk. In the window was a new release titled Women Who Remake the Room. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I took the long way to the train, letting the breeze roll over me, like some invisible thank you. At the station, I sat on a bench and looked up at the arrivals board, smiling at the metaphor. Because no matter where you've been, something always arrives. And this time it was mine. Later that evening at home, I found one last letter slipped under my apartment door. No envelope, just a folded piece of stationery. "Nora!" I watched you take every hit and never swing wild. You're the first leader I've ever believed in. If I ever get to run something, I'll build it in your name. Anonymous analyst formerly invisible. I read it twice, then placed it in the drawer beside the apology letter from Leonard. Not because I needed trophies, but because they reminded me of something deeper. Not everything worth keeping fits in a resume. Some things only live in silence memory, and the eyes of those you leave behind stronger than you found them. And that's the ending I chose. Not back, not bitter. Forward. Always forward.